Hello, hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday. This is Power in Numbers Live, which is my monthly live show that I do over on YouTube. And also we stream this over onto Facebook. So wherever you're watching me from, hi. Say hello in the comments when you get here. And I am excited for this episode. This is the monthly live show. The reason that I do this outside of my normal YouTube videos that I do every week is to really be able to talk about things going on right now. That's hard to do on YouTube because of just the nature of creating videos and how long it takes. And so this is a much easier way for me to just speak directly to you all and to be able to interact with you and take your questions, and also to talk about things that are really timely for business owners to know right now. So I've had a couple of great episodes lately, if I don't say so myself, or if I do say so myself. And so I want to kind of drive you back to those if you haven't seen them. We did one last month. That was our May of 2026. That was all about AI. And I kind of got to, wax and wane a little prophetic about what I think could happen, how it could impact small business, and where we might be going, and how kind of overall from an economic perspective, some of the things that I'm thinking through. We've also talked about things like inflation, which is still a big topic of conversation. We're going to touch on that a little bit today because it's still happening. So those are the types of things we talk about. We have 3 different sections: news, to-dos, and cues. And so before we get started, though, we always have a sponsor. And this time, my book, which I usually have sitting right next to me, but don't currently right now. Hang on just a second. My book, Hidden Profit, is the sponsor for today. And the reason for that is because we have noticed that Amazon, it's Prime Day, for those of you who are paying attention, which I feel like Prime Day it started being like a day. It's kind of like Black Friday, and now it's like a multi-day experience. So technically, I think it started yesterday, it goes to tomorrow, but prices are changing. But Amazon is doing a sale for my book today. So we don't control the pricing, unfortunately, on Amazon or any of the retailers, because that comes through our publishing company. However, when we do see a sale, we want to tell you about it. So this is the lowest we've seen it. This morning, I logged on and it was, crazy to see that it's over 50% discounted right now. So if you're interested, definitely go purchase it. Go check it out. Hidden Profit. We will post the link for you to go directly to Amazon. Obviously, you can buy it on other retailers as well, but it's not on sale today. And for whatever reason, our hardcover is cheaper right now than the Kindle version, and is cheaper than the audio version. So I don't know, kind of crazy. Go ahead and get your book order in. Okay, here's the link right here. You can just go grab it. Yeah, so we'll put it on YouTube and on Facebook so that you can grab the link wherever you're watching this. Okay, let's see. Where should we start? Let's go to our first section for today. I love those. I love a good transition. Okay, so let's talk about news. And there's a few things that I wanted to bring up. We're going to talk a little more general economically and specifically what's kind of the vibe out there with other small businesses. I've heard a few different things from people. I feel like the overall vibe kind of matches with what I'm seeing in this survey. So I will show you what the NFIB came out with, which is a great organization. I've done webinars for the NFIB before. They're a really good source of how are things going with small business. So the June 9th NFIB survey, they do a decent amount of surveys on kind of optimism in small business. What's the outlook? How are people feeling? And so you can definitely see here that it says, the headline was that small businesses report reduced optimism. Now, when you kind of scroll down a little bit, it shows you it's just 0.6 points in May. So it went to 95.3, but it remains below its 52-year average of 98. So higher is better on these. What I also thought was interesting is that the uncertainty index rose 3 points from April to 91, remaining well above its historical average of 68. So I think what I read into there is actually it really matches what I hear from a lot of business owners right now, that the economy kind of seems like it seems okay, sort of, but there are certain um, sectors that might be being impacted more than others. If you rely on gasoline, right, fuel costs, if those are important to you, then you're probably feeling it more now. If you have transportation as part of what you're doing, you might be in a little bit of a different spot than others who don't have that as a risk factor for them. Although I will argue that, the cost of gas going up impacts us all in some way, shape, or form, even if it's just through the supply chain in some way, or just the cost of things that we're purchasing. In general, it's going to hit us. Hopefully that calms down soon, but it is yet to be seen what that looks like. So I thought this was interesting because I do see uncertainty being kind of the thing where it's almost like this feeling of something impending. And it's felt like that for a little while. I don't know if that's just me, but it's kind of like, it's almost like waiting for the other shoe to drop, like what's coming around the corner. We feel like we can't really see very well around the corner. So I think that really goes towards this, the historical average of the uncertainty index is 68. We're at 91, which is significantly higher than the historical average. Things feel uncertain. We aren't sure what to do. We've, been through the whipsaw of tariffs. We've got inflation driving prices up, cost of labor going up, right? All kinds of things now. Gasoline, it does feel like it's a little uncertain right now. So if you're feeling that, it's not just you, okay? So I think there are some interesting things in here. I'll it's linked down below so that you can check out the article yourself. It might be a little bit too difficult to read, but I wanted to point out a couple of things. In May, 13% of small business owners cited labor quality as their single most important problem, which was actually down 5%. Let's see, 14% of business owners reported labor costs as their single most important problem, up 5 points. So it kind of switched, where labor quality is now less of a problem and labor cost is a bigger problem. So maybe people are able to find quality a little bit better now than they were a couple of months ago, but it's getting expensive. And I think that that's something that I've heard as well. 16% of small business owners plan to make capital outlays in the next 6 months, which is down a little bit, but not too much. And reports of supply chain disruption picked up in May. So I think these are all kind of interesting price points. I think this was interesting as well. Reports of both actual and planned price increases rose significantly. The net percent of owners raising average selling prices rose 6 points from April to net 36%, marking the highest reading since March of 2023. Okay, that often comes with inflation. As the cost of goods rises and the cost of services rises, then small business owners also have to make those pricing adjustments. I'm actually happy to see the pricing adjustments. Oftentimes I find that it's the small businesses that get squeezed, right? Because big businesses have they have more leverage over their supply chain to be able to keep prices low. They also, for them, it's a little bit easier to increase prices. It's the small businesses often that really struggle with that. And then they end up sort of, kind of getting squeezed in the middle, right? Because we don't want to raise prices on our consumers, but our prices are rising to be able to provide those goods or services. And so that can create a lot of problem for small businesses. And it's part of the reason we see a lot of small businesses that just don't sustain in the long term. So I'm actually glad to see that a lot of people do have plans to raise prices, either have already done it or, have a plan to do it, and it's gone up quite a bit. And then kind of going along with that, 18% of business owners cited inflation as their single most important business problem. Okay, 18%. That's up 2 points, and that's the highest reading since December of 2024. So inflation is still a problem, but it does look like small businesses are at least starting to adjust those prices. So if you have not yet, and we're going to get to this in the to-do section when we talk about a mid-year check-in, oftentimes I tell people, doing a deep dive into your pricing maybe once a year is really important. In a highly inflationary economy, which we are now, or even a moderate inflationary economy, depends on what, where you draw those lines. We are at higher than normal levels of inflation. We need to be looking at that much more often. Because remember, if you wait till the end of the year to review your pricing, you're missing 6 months of, higher profitability between now, when you could be making those decisions, and the end of the year. So you don't have to have a full year. July is actually a great time often, depending on your type of business. It might be a quiet time for you, maybe not, depending on what you do. But it could be a good time for like that mid-year check-in. How are you doing against your goals? What's your profitability looking like? What are your opportunities? And do you need to make any changes, including changing your prices? Okay. All right. That was a little bit of a preview for what's to come. Okay, so now I want to go on to just to kind of reiterate. Some of this is just backing up what I just said, but I like to look at multiple different sources when I'm kind of getting a read on how people are feeling in the small business community. Sorry, I'm getting my little notifications. So this comes from Vistage, which is partners with the Wall Street Journal, and they do some good research as well. So I thought this was interesting. This is their small business index, which essentially, it says it's calculated from responses to, they do questionnaires on the future state of the economy and profitability projections, hiring, et cetera. So hire is better here. What I find interesting specifically, and you can check this chart out and play around with it as well here if you want to. What I find really interesting about this chart is the movements, especially when you kind of come out a little bit. So this is showing 5 years. I love to play around with charts in terms of, how much they're showing, because you kind of get a different picture depending on what you look at. So let's look at all time and see how that changes things. Okay. So you can kind of see, this isn't even this is still showing me. Here we go. Now this is showing me all time. So you can see it even put a line on here for pandemic, as if we would forget what happened in March of 2020. So the lowest on record was April of 2020 at 44. Then we saw the huge, massive rebound that went, back to kind of pre-pandemic, 2018 levels. Right. And then we've kind of seen the small business index falling. So kind of outlook on small businesses and how small businesses feel falling. We're kind of just hanging around this space now, which is lower than our pre-pandemic, which I think, again, aligns with what I've heard people say. Right. It feels like we didn't know it, but we may have been living, especially around here, like in this kind of golden age of business. Again, if only we could go back and tell ourselves that, because it maybe didn't feel like that at the time, but it was easier. Life was easier for a lot of small businesses. And now it's just a lot more uncertain. There's some other interesting things here in terms of this survey that they did. So basically, the overall economy compared to a year ago, have the overall economic conditions in the United States improved, remained the same, or worsened? You can see that most people have said worsened. And again, this is of small business owners that this was conducted on. Future economy. Again, how do people think it's going to perform in the next 12 months? Most people actually are kind of in this middle, like maybe it's going to be neutral to worse. There's a little bit more optimism, though, about, maybe it'll get a little better than it has been. So that's good. However, when you talk about, this is talking about overall economy, but when people talk about their specific businesses, it's interesting to see how the perspective changes. And I think this is good and shows that we're getting out of this feeling that the economy drives whether we can succeed or not, right? If you feel like that, and yes, of course, we can't ignore the economy and what's happening around us, right? We don't live in a vacuum. However, we as small business owners can't always be living in fear of what's coming, because it's going to make us less resilient. We're not going to, be able to make the decisions that we need to make to be able to stay strong as a company. We're going to be operating out of a place of fear, which is not a great place to be operating a company from, right? And so I find this interesting that while kind of the economic outlook hasn't felt great, most businesses are saying they expect their revenues to increase. They expect their profitability to increase, and they're planning to increase future investments or stay the same. And they're also planning to add employees, which I found this really interesting too, especially given we're in the age of AI. You would think that maybe people have the idea that they're going to reduce their workforce and replace some of their workers with AI. If you've seen my content that I've done, you know that I think that that isn't necessarily the best course of action or even really reasonable for true small business owners. I think we can gain efficiencies with AI for those who choose to use it, but I don't think that fully replacing staff is reasonable for true small companies like us. And I think it would actually kind of reduce the real leading thing that small businesses have that attract people to it, which is, that closer relationship and personality. And we don't want to be, you know, cutting that off for the sake of saving a couple of pennies. It's not going to help us in the long run. But I thought this was really interesting just to see, where most people are not super jazzed about the overall economy, they do feel hopeful for their own businesses. And I think that that is a good shift. Okay. Now, one more thing I'm going to show on this before I move on. And that is, how are customers doing? Like, what's going on? Are people buying still? Right? I'll tell you, I've been online for Prime Day. Yes, people are still buying. They really are. And I think that that is an interesting thing too. So I found this article on AP. Let me make it a little bit bigger for you. I don't know why I'm getting some fun ads. Let's get rid of Subway ads. So retail sales were up more than they were expected to be. I think it was expected to be about 0.5% up in May. It was up 0.9% in May. I'm curious to see now with June, again, with Prime Day and all those types of things going on. It seems to become another hotbed of sales, kind of like Black Friday around this time of year. But I did think that this was interesting. Yeah, so retail sales rose 0.9%. It was previously 0.4%. If you exclude sales at gas stations, which again are up because prices are up, May rose 0.7%. Now, I will say it's saying that sales got a boost from generous government tax refunds for April and May. Anytime, the people are getting tax refunds, you're going to see an increase in spend. And we saw that, whenever people get money from the government, that happens. That happened during COVID when people got money in from PPP loans and various different things. Spending went up. It's why, kind of when we looked at that chart earlier, we saw that huge fall off in, business optimism and outlook in March and April of 2020 when things were falling down, and then a huge quick spike back up. That wasn't organic. That was created by, money being injected into the economy, which then kept consumers going and kept businesses in business. Now, did that then eventually lead to some of the inflation issues we're having today? Almost certainly, right? So again, it saved our economy in the moment, and that's great. And it kept small businesses afloat. But also there's long-term, we always have to gauge the short-term versus long-term. Who's to say? I'm not an economist as to what the best strategy is. But it definitely is part of at least what we have seen in the past. So what I will also say is that these figures aren't inflation adjusted. So higher prices likely helped boost sales. So I think some of this is not just because we're just looking at revenue here, right? I think some of the increased sales is just, we just showed you that people are planning to or have increased their prices. So did the number of sales, I would be curious to know this, did the number of sales made actually go up? Or is it just that, the same number or even less sales were made at higher prices? Hard to say with the data that we have, but it does look like, the economy is still moving and consumers are still buying. It says there are a few weak spots. Electronics and appliance stores and department stores had some sales declines, but overall, most things were pretty, especially with online sales, doesn't surprise me. It seems like so much has gone the way of that. So if you are a small business and you don't have a way of selling your goods or services online, it might be time to think about that. And just find another way for people to find you and pay for the things that you offer. Okay, doesn't mean it has to be your key source of business, but it does help more people to be able to find you. All right, let's move on to the next section, which I gave a little bit of a preview to already. Okay, 4 to-dos right now. It is June. So other than like going on vacation with your family, which I highly recommend, I took 3 weeks off with my family. It's the longest I have ever taken off of work. I did exactly 0 minutes of work. Thank you to my team for that. Uh, I highly recommend taking some time off. But when you're back and when you're in the mode to get some work done, it's a good time to really take a step back and look at the big picture of things. Sometimes, I know for me, it's slower. It's a slower time of year. It just is. That's not true for all of you, but sometimes it can be hard to figure out, like, what am I supposed to be doing right now? Like, what do when you get wrapped up in tasks and things like that. But it's a really good time to take a step back and say, okay, we're halfway through the year. How are things going? Go get out the goals that you made for the year, wherever you saved them. Hopefully you saved them somewhere. We did a workshop that a lot of people went to back in November. So if you were there, you made some goals for your year, go back and grab those out and see what your goals were and measure against them. A lot of times we make these goals and then we never really look back at them until maybe the end of the year, where we see how we came in. But I want you to kind of get in the habit of setting those goals and then, regularly looking at how you're doing, because what we don't want to do is get halfway through the year and be like, oh, well, I guess we're not going to hit those goals. Now it's about figuring out, okay, is that still reasonable? And what would it take? Right? Or maybe you need to increase your goals and go higher. Maybe you see like, oh, wait a second, we have opportunity here. So I think taking, even if it's a day, right? It doesn't have to be a whole entire week of a CEO retreat. I do love doing that, but maybe it's a day that you sit down and you really dive in and you pull up your year-to-date, financial statements, which hopefully you have, or you can get those ready so that you can look at them and see how you're doing. Look at your pricing. Like I said, in an inflationary economy, we need to be looking at our pricing, I would say every quarter, to just make sure that you're adjusting as you need to with how fast prices are increasing, right? Costs are increasing. And we want to make sure that we're not getting left behind in that and then having our margins squeezed and then potentially setting ourselves up to not be able to have a resilient functioning business that helps people, pays employees, all of those types of things that are really important about small business owners, and paying yourself, which is also very important. Don't work for free, my friends. So, I would highly recommend sitting down right now at this time of the year. It's also a good time. It might be a little early to start talking to your accountant. You can engage with them. They might be on vacation too, right? But it could be a good time to start thinking about, is the amount I'm putting towards my, taxes, is it enough? Do I need to change how much I'm paying towards estimated taxes? I do have a video that is a good, like, in absence of talking to an accountant, if you want to get a feel for, am I on the right track for how much I'm going to owe this year based on, where you are at this point in the year? I have a video that goes over kind of 3 numbers you need to know to help you estimate your taxes. And it's kind of a back of the envelope way. Obviously, a tax accountant is going to be able to get way, way, way more granular, but that costs time and money. So if you want to try to kind of DIY this yourself, definitely check out this video that's over on YouTube. It's like a 10-minute video. It's pretty quick, but it walks you through exactly where to find numbers from your last year's tax return that'll help you estimate this year's taxes due. And if you need to make adjustments to how much you're setting aside or how much you're paying in estimated taxes, this is a really good time to do that. I've definitely been in the same area where I don't realize until November or December that I'm way, way, way under how much I should have paid in, which is a good problem to have because it does mean I made more money that year than I expected, but a bad time to have that problem. Because at that point I was thinking about, how do I put more money into my 401k, and how do I, what can I do so that I don't have this big surprise tax bill? And I learned a lot from that. And that's something that I teach in everything that I do, as well as how to make sure that you're prepared for taxes. So highly recommend having, paying your estimated taxes, but also saving some additional money, especially if your business is doing better than last year, saving some additional money in a separate account that you can tap into. And if you don't end up needing it for taxes, great, then you can give yourself a refund from it. So that's what I do. Even when I owe, it feels like I'm getting a refund because I can release the extra money that's sitting in that account. Okay. All right. So that's it for my to-dos. And we're going to move on to the question section today. Okay, so if you don't know, you can actually submit questions to us. We have a link that allows you to submit those questions. We give that link out on YouTube and on Facebook as well. But if you have questions, you can submit them. I have one question that I wanted to answer today that had been submitted. And that question came from Adrian. So I'll put it up on the screen actually, because it's a longer question, but I thought it was a really great question. So Adrian, thank you for the question. Let me see if it's even going to let me. Okay, here we go. All right, so here is the question from Adrian. All right, so Adrian asked, how do you find a CPA who will do more than file taxes? It's key. Someone who will teach you tax strategies, help implement them, and provide proactive planning throughout the year. I've worked with 3 CPAs, and each is mainly focused on filing returns. As a clinician who started 2 small healthcare businesses, I need education and some hands-on guidance. I'm willing to pay for quality support, but I'm unsure whether I need a bookkeeper, accountant, CPA, fractional CFO, or a combination. How should a small business owner structure this team, and what questions should I ask to find the right people? Okay. I love this. I'm going to put the beginning of your question up here so people know what we're talking about. I love this, Adrian. And the reason that I do is I have so many thoughts about this. And part of the reason that I do what I do is because it is really difficult to find the help that you need. And part of that is because it's very difficult to figure out who can help you with all of these different pieces. And it may be, and often is, different people. And I think a lot of people want to go to one person. They want to have one, person that will do all the things for them. But think about it, oftentimes, these are all very different things. And while they may fall under the umbrella of numbers, that doesn't mean that somebody who's really good at filing tax returns, for instance, would be good at looking, proactively into the future to try to help you, project out your cash flows, right? Those are 2 very different things. One of them is backward looking. One of them is forward looking. One of them is really just more of being a bean counter and putting numbers into a form that they're given, right? And the other one is more proactive. And ultimately, it is really hard to determine who knows what they're talking about and who you need to hire. I do recommend talking to multiple different people. And I think what you need also depends on where you are. I think you in your journey, Adrian, you have 2 different healthcare businesses. You're willing to pay for quality support. It probably is time for you to get, if you don't have a bookkeeper. I recommend that be different than your CPA, meaning different than the person who's prepping your taxes. Reason being, it's good to get 2 sets of eyes. If they're the same person, number one, you're probably getting overcharged for bookkeeping because CPAs charge more for bookkeeping, and they're not particularly better at it than anyone else is. In fact, they might be worse, right? So get a bookkeeper, and it doesn't need to be a licensed, bookkeeper. They just need to be somebody who knows the tool you're using really, really well and understands bookkeeping. And then get a separate accountant who's doing your taxes. And that may or may not be the same person who's doing forward looking. So you can ask those questions about, to kind of get a feel for, do you offer more strategic help? And some tax accountants do. Some say they do, but when you ask them what that is, they'll tell you they help you with your estimated taxes. But oftentimes, if you really want kind of more strategic, proactive advice, that's either a CFO, and a CFO will be not necessarily from a tax perspective. They're going to be looking at profitability. They're going to be looking at, pricing. They're going to be looking at expenses, how to grow the business, right? So your CFOs are going to have a little bit of a different skill set, maybe doing some forecasting for you. Your tax strategists is often what they're called, are going to be kind of more forward-looking tax strategy, looking at What might you qualify for? Again, that may or may not actually be the person who's doing your taxes. And so what I recommend, and it's good that you are here on this channel, is if you're going to interview, and I absolutely do think that people should have, the right people around them. What you can get kind of depends on where you are in your business, right? Early on, the first thing that I recommend is people stop doing their own taxes. Even if you're self-employed getting a 1099, don't do your own taxes. You're missing opportunities. So that's number one. Number two, when you can afford it, is get a bookkeeper. So get those kind of compliance things done. And then you can start looking at the more strategic people, which are going to be more expensive. Those services are just more expensive by design. Compliance is kind of a check the box, but forward-looking strategy is really something that takes more expertise and more understanding of your business. And so when you are kind of talking to people, really try to ask them questions about what they do. What does that look like? How do you work with them, right? And I think it's good to have a source of education yourself, whether it's this channel or another channel or a book you're reading, Hidden Profit, whatever you plan to do, right? I do recommend that you have a source to learn things yourself, at least enough to know the kinds of questions to ask. So for example, ideally, we want somebody to come to us and say, hey, did you know, you have kids and they're 12 and 14. Did you know that you can hire them in your business and pay them and get a deduction for that and open a Roth IRA, right? They may not do that. Your tax accountant may not do that. Even your tax strategist, they should do that, but maybe not. However, if you watch my content and you see me talking about it, right? And then you go ask, oftentimes that opens up kind of that dialogue, and you can gauge whether or not they really know what they're talking about, right? If they tell you, no, it's not legal to hire your kids, you could say, well, Jamie Trull said that there's an exemption from child labor laws if you're working for your parent-owned business, right? And you can kind of tell whether they know what they're talking about and there's somebody who can really help you with this. So all that is to say, that's a very long answer. I wish that I had a better way to kind of give this advice. But I do think talk to people, understand what they do, because people, even with the same letters behind their name or calling themselves the exact same thing, may do completely different duties. There's not a standardized, here's what a CPA does. There's not a standardized, here's what every CFO does. Everyone's going to be different, and it's going to be built towards the thing they're best at, right? So really don't hold back from asking questions of people. Talk to other business owners who they have used, where they've had good experiences, right? That way you're not just kind of searching the internet for Randy McRanderson, right? And then you can ask those business owners like, hey, how does this work with you? And you might feel more comfortable kind of asking those questions to understand what they do for them versus, asking them themselves. But I will say, if you don't feel comfortable asking the hard questions, or if you feel like you don't feel comfortable asking the quote unquote dumb questions, there are no dumb questions, but if you feel like they're dumb, it might not be the right fit of a person for you. So there's my soapbox. That took me like 10 minutes, but it was a great question. And yeah, I appreciate that. Everybody keep, sending in your questions when you have them. Here are the places you can send those questions where they get answered. So if you're watching on YouTube, this is where you can go, just jamietrull.com/YouTube. Or if you're watching over on Facebook, go to jamietrull.com/newsletter, and it will walk you through how to be able to submit a question for me to answer live at the next Power in Numbers. All right, everybody. Well, I think that's it. I will be back at the end of July. We'll see how things are, what the outlook is feeling like, how business owners are feeling. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your summer, and I'll see you in a month. Bye, everybody.